This is one of the coolest interactions you will see between Jake Paul and Cliffe.
And then does your soul become a different thing? Also, I ask myself, like, okay, what is the soul? Or like a child, like say a child passes away and they're like, you know, essentially a blank canvas.
You know, Logan, you and Jesus are, I think, a little closer than you might realize when you talk about justice.
That's going to get clipped up.
Okay? Justice.
That's going everywhere.
The reason is,
I want to touch on the soul thing really quick because this has always intrigued me. Okay, so the soul is the person that can be shaped by human experience. So like if you were to like run a simulation of like Cliffe, 100 simulations of the life of Cliffe in some future distant world, do you become a pastor in all 100 of those simulations? Is every one of those simulations, is Cliffe a good guy? Especially if the human experience that each Cliffe experience or goes through is different. And then does your soul become a different thing? And then also, I ask myself, like, okay, what is the soul? Because you're saying it's shaped by human experience, but like, what about like a baby or like a child? Like, say a child passes away and they're like, you know, essentially a blank canvas. What happens to that soul? What if that human hasn't accepted Jesus because he's 4?
Well, that's why they baptize babies, right?
well, I'm convinced, though, that babies who die are going to be in heaven.
Yeah.
Because of the way Jesus treated children. He said, let the little children come to me, for to such belongs the kingdom of heaven. So God is a compassionate God, and obviously a baby has not sinned. They've not rebelled against God, so I think they're going to be in heaven. But I think you raise a great question.
Cliffe
when
is
it
so
comes
wise.
to Cliffe, if there were 100 different scenarios over the next 1,000 years of you, would you always become a minister? I don't think so, because that smacks of determinism. It's in the stars. It's written in the stars. You have to do this. You have to go down this path. No. When I fall down a set of stairs, I don't pick myself up at the bottom and say, phew, glad that's over. No, I pick myself up at the bottom and say, idiot, pick up your feet. Don't stumble down the stairs. It's really painful. In other words, it's not been predetermined. That's this whole issue of free will. That's why I hold you responsible and you hold me responsible for what I do, for what I say, because you know I don't have to do it.
It's not a script.
Exactly. It's not a script. This whole idea that God writes on a piece of paper, what you and I are going to do tomorrow, locks it in a bank vault, and then you and I have to do what's written on the paper. That's determinism. That's fatalism. No. No, we're human beings created in the image of God, which means God partially limits his power by giving us a free will, and then we choose what we do. But God does hold us responsible, and that's why I love what you pointed out about the importance of responsibility. But you know, Logan, you and Jesus are, I think, a little closer than you might realize when you talk about justice.
That's going to get clipped up.
Okay? Justice.
That's going everywhere.
The reason is, why did Christ die on a cross? He didn't die on a cross because God is lovey-dovey. He died on a cross because God is just. And because God is just, the penalty for evil is death and hell. And Christ went to the cross, paid that penalty. Why? Because God's lovey-dovey? No, because God is just. The penalty for human evil must be paid. Oh, that's not cool. That's not cool. Oh, that's very cool. I understand you're an expectant father. Little baby coming into the world?
Little baby
Your
girl.
mom was bragging to me about it.
Yeah.
Little baby girl.
Sounds good.
Yep.
All right, Logan. Now let's talk theoretically.
Okay.
Let's say somebody murders that little baby.
God damn it, Cliffe.
Didn't even get a chance to do anything. Didn't even make one video.
Good response, Logan.
Horrific.
Yeah,
I wasn't expecting
Why would you say that like that?
Cliff,
All right.
come on, dude.
Good response.
Yo, that's the hook.
Sorry, Grandma.
Yo, sorry, Ma.
Ex-grandma.
She didn't make it.
Damn, dude.
Okay, I love your response. Why? Because you know very well that if the police or the judge lets that dude off scot-free, your baby does not matter. Now, what's fascinating is the way so many secular people will say, well, God's just love, so there's going to be no judgment. Really? So God doesn't judge the guy who murders my child? That's a clear statement on God's part. Your child, Cliffe, does not matter to me. Therefore, I will not judge the guy who murdered your kid. Well, let's get one thing straight. God doesn't care about your kid. Your kid does not matter to God. And that's a lie. Jesus said, no, God does care about every single one of us, which is why when we hurt each other, when we rape each other, when we cut each other off at the knees, God will judge us for that because he loves us because we matter to him. Does that make any sense?
It totally makes sense.
Makes a lot of sense.
But again, it just sounds like intent really matters. It sounds like. But I've also had
Oh,
people
no.
tell me in like the mistakes that I've made, like sometimes intent doesn't matter. At least in this human world.
Okay, one sec. So intent really matters, and intent really. Well, other people tell me intent doesn't matter. Well, it's like you're listening to people. Like, listen to the inner voice, which comes from God, and like that's why you're so misconstrued, is because everyone around you're like letting them tell you what to do. Right? No, intent matters. Everything is intentional. God made you, this earth, everything with intention. Everything's intentional and to the detail. So don't listen to what people say. Like he's having trouble about what people are saying. Just forget that, right? Just forget that.
Sometimes your
feel?
intent doesn't matter.
What's that saying? The pathway to hell is
These guys are
with the
confused.
best intention.
Yep.
You can see it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like God is like or when I say God, that's Jesus as well. Jesus, God, Holy Spirit,
and the Holy
as well.
Spirit.
Yep. And the
Holy
Holy Spirit
Trinity.
and the
Okay,
Father.
okay. Because just for the listeners, like when I say God to them, it might be a different God.
We got to talk about that too.
Yeah,
But
we gotta talk about-
continue on.
Yeah.
It sounds like he is the measure of whether or not someone is morally sound, and he is constantly all knowing and calculating about someone's intent. So it's like you can't hide from God, essentially. Like if I know
all
like
over
I'm
the
playing
place.
in a basketball game, like you mentioned earlier, and Mike goes up for a layup, and or he blocks my shot, and he comes down. Maybe I don't give him that elbow, but maybe I stick my foot out later in the game. I know it was intentful, but
That's how my spleen was ruptured when I was 16. Someone did
Actually?
exactly that.
Wow. So
Yeah,
what
that's
was the
nothing.
person's name?
Injury.
I believe it was TJ. Unfortunately.
So TJ, God knows that TJ
Bless you.
tripped Mike on purpose, and Mike had to get his spleen replaced, and that's why he ended up doing heroin. Is TJ being judged by God in that moment, and can he hide his intentions from God?
God is watching. God is watching us always. Oh man, that's a really bummer idea. Oh, no. God is watching has been one of the most powerful civilizing influences in the world. Because when you live your life understanding God is watching me, then you got to ask yourself, should I really do this? Or should I not? I begin to reconsider. I begin to ask myself the difficult ethical question, is this the wisest, best thing to do in this circumstance, or is it not?
I ask that question constantly. That's to a
great.
point of obsession, and I get very,
like Mike.
scared
So
when
that's
I even nowadays I've had a bit of a change on my thoughts on pornography and masturbation. I want to talk about some of that stuff because I do feel that presence. I really do, and constantly ask for forgiveness both in the morning and at night when I pray.
That's good.
But the way that you described some of the sins that we were just talking about now, we were talking about murder and some of those things. It sounds like the most judged things by God's are human on human sin. Is that too broad of a statement, or would it be acceptable to assume that God is not mostly, but severe in punishment on what we do and how we treat each other specifically?
Well, if you don't have justice, you can't have love. And if you don't forgive somebody from your heart, you can't have a true type of justice. I don't believe so, at least. Because if you're going to reconcile, for example, with somebody who you really hate, back to this topic, you have to forgive them in your heart, and then you can seek justice and then reconcile. You can't just seek justice for what they did to you and then say, whatever, we're reconciled. No, you have to have that level of forgiveness first. And if that doesn't occur, then there's no ultimate reconciliation. And I think this is kind of off your good point, but I just want to touch on, I think in our culture today, it's becoming more and more individualistic, where it's all about me. It's not about community. And so when it's all about me and my own personal ambitions and dreams and where I can get, we see the breakdown, if that's true in a marriage, like a really high percentage chance that is going to end in divorce because it's about my dreams. And if you get in the way of my happiness, we're done. But you see it in society. And so when that occurs, forgiveness is like impossible, because to your point, you're going to be constantly warring against different people who bump up against you. And if we can't get to the point of saying, no, it's about community, it's about self-denial, like Christ talked about, not about self-assertion, then we're going to never forgive. Like if it's about me, my dreams, and you can't forgive. So that's why we see forgiveness, which I love that you put such a heavy emphasis on forgiveness. It's becoming completely obsolete in our culture today because it's individualism.
Completely.
Completely.
But by the way, it's like man, I feel like at least
Cancel culture, right?
on X, dude, everyone is the judge, jury, and executioner.
Yeah.
Why, and how did this happen? Where everyone thinks that
Right.
they have the ability to presume someone good or bad, and then be vocal about it online.
Right.
It's a weird culture.
It is.
Yeah.
Forgiveness is becoming
It is.
harder and harder. Admittedly, even like for me,
Right.
the world is headed in an interesting direction, which is why I actually love religion for this, because in a world where like it's just so hard to understand yourself and be guided by, I don't know, your friends, your parents, things you see online, your environment in general, this code, this Bible, or any scripture from any religion usually is a good testament as to how someone could live and lead a good, healthy, positive, beneficial life.
Do you see religion as something totally different? Like, is this historically true? Did Jesus Christ actually die on a cross? Was he actually risen? You look at Bono, for example. He says 35% of the world is Christian. Well, if Jesus Christ claimed to be God, I work with schizophrenics oftentimes. They claim to be Jesus Christ and God. And so then he was a schizophrenic. Well, Bono would say, you truly believe that a schizophrenic could turn 35% of the world Christian, change that percentage? I mean, maybe, but the likeliness is very small. And so you have to come through Christ and believe that he is actually the Son of God. Then you get to, okay, how am I going to grow in the fruits of the Spirit of love, joy, peace, patience,
Beautiful.
kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. But it has to come through first believing like
True faith.
he's the Son of God or he's not. And so just drop this whole thing.
I'm not putting blame on Logan, but I mean, he's kind of far, right? He doesn't really believe in all of it and doesn't really know too much about it. He hints at some good points, but in reality, what Cliffe says is a perfect response, and it's something you should say if you ever encounter this in your life. You're actually much closer to Jesus than you think, and all the good points that he pointed out. And it makes someone think twice. It makes someone think it over, if you will. My dreams for the podcast to come soon. Think it over, right? So if this video helped you, write it down in the comments below, and look forward to the next one.